Good evening, and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. And tonight we have the special privilege of talking about the great medical and humanitarian organization, St. Jude's Children's Hospital, and a special event that's coming up in Chicago where you too can help out to help fund this wonderful organization. Our guests tonight are Dr. Bob Breit, former chairman of Board of Governors at St. Jude's, and Mr. Joe Bisceglia, partner at Jenner and Block and the co-chair of the committee for this wonderful fundraiser, the 4-star restaurant Extravaganza. So welcome to the show, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Kevin.
So a lot of people have heard of St. Jude's and may know something about it, see the commercials on TV. But let's start with some of the history. It's fascinating. How did it get started and how did it get where it is today?
Well, St. Jude was founded by Danny Thomas, the late great entertainer from the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s. And he was a struggling actor with one child, his one daughter, Marlo Thomas, which you may know.
Mm-hmm. Also an actress.
Also an actress. And, but he was not doing well. And he walked into a church and prayed to St. Jude, the patron saint of hopeless causes. And he said, "Show me my way in the world and I will build you a shrine." And very shortly after that, he became the great Danny Thomas with a very successful career, television and movies and so forth. And he came back to his parish priest from Toledo, Ohio, many years later. The priest was no longer in Ohio. He was actually here in Chicago. Cardinal Stritch was his name. And he said, "I'm ready to build you a shrine. I'm ready to pay back." And Cardinal Stritch said, "We don't need a shrine. We need a hospital. We have land in Memphis, Tennessee, and we need a hospital there." And that's where it all started. So
it was Danny Thomas being grateful for the breaks he was given and
Yes.
wanting to give back. Now, how did it get focused on children?
Well, that happened with Cardinal Stritch back in the 50s, and that's when this took place. Hospitals were highly segregated. There was a lot of racial tension, and the idea was to build a hospital in Memphis, Tennessee that would accept all people. Eventually,
That was a radical idea in the 1950s.
it was. It actually was. And the focus on children was immediate. As the idea evolved, it became important that this be a research hospital, not just a hospital. The magic that is St. Jude is the fact that it is a research hospital with doctors and scientists side by side, giving ideas to each other back and forth, called bench to bedside, and translational work that takes the science to the patient, and things that are learned from patients go right back to the laboratory to create new ideas.
So in fact, we were talking before the show, the actual hospital itself is fairly small. It's only, 60 beds, I think you said?
Yes.
So the real effect of the hospital is not so much, certainly the patients who are there benefit tremendously, but the real effect is this research that gets spread around the country, around the world, correct?
I think that's true. I think for every child that's treated at St. Jude, there's 1,000 children who benefit worldwide. And the protocols that are created there are shared freely and quickly around the world. And that is the real importance of St. Jude. The patients who are unfortunate enough to have to go to St. Jude are very fortunate in that they don't spend any of their own money. There is no decision, there's no box that's checked when a patient comes to St. Jude, can this patient afford to come to St. Jude? This allows the patients and their families to concentrate on what's important, getting well, getting cured. We take care of their housing, we take care of their transportation, we take care of their meals, and there is no money that comes out of any patient's pocket.
So this, I would imagine, is one of the reasons why the number of beds is limited, because this is a very expensive proposition. Is that correct, or is there a reason for the 60-bed limit that's not driven by economic concerns?
We have the number of beds that we need. Most of the treatment that takes place at St. Jude is actually outpatient. So the only patients that come into the hospital are kids that are a little bit in trouble. There may be a complication from the cancer or issues that come about from treatment. Certain kids do get their treatment, the more rigorous treatments in the hospital, but almost everything else is done outpatient.
So, for example, if a child were brought there and needed, 6 weeks of chemotherapy, for example, would that child and the parents then be put up in lodging nearby and then come into the hospital for the treatment and go back to wherever they're staying, the temporary quarters?
Not only would they be put in lodging, but this is lodging that has been built and is controlled by St. Jude through generous donations from others. And so each family stays in an apartment. And they're there sometimes for 2 or 3 years.
Because treatment, as sadly I'm familiar with cancer treatment, and I understand that it can go on for quite some time.
Yes.
So that the cost of that 2 or 3 year stay is picked up entirely by St. Jude, correct?
Correct.
That's
some
astonishing.
patients do have insurance, so we will accept insurance, but there's no out of pocket for the patients. No.
Got it.
And there's I think to some degree, Bob, don't they accept the very difficult cases that will permit them to do some cutting edge research with the various patients who come who are susceptible to a certain kind of cancer that they really need to find out more about. So the patients who are actually in the hospital also advance the research aspect of the hospital.
Probably more so than the outpatients, because the cases are tougher and require more cutting edge understanding.
Correct.
Is that fair to say?
Not exactly. I mean, the patients are St. Jude patients, whether they're in the hospital or not. They're St. Jude patients. And almost every patient is on some sort of research protocol. That is not something you'll see at any other hospital, adult cancer hospitals or any other hospital that treats kids with cancer. Most kids are treated with standard treatments as opposed to cutting edge ideas. And that's how you advance cures.
So what is the risk there? Not to get too far afield from fundraising, which we want to talk about tonight, but a lot of cutting edge cures don't work, and this is the nature of research. A lot of things are tried, a few actually work. So how does St. Jude protect against a child coming in and getting this cutting edge stuff that turns out maybe in the end to be ineffective, when something more standard might have been more effective?
Well, that's a tough question. I don't know the exact answer to that. Suffice it to say that the clinical care that the kids receive there, research protocols aside, is the finest in the world.
So if a child's not responding, for example, they'll try something else, even if that means going back to standard protocols.
Yes.
Okay.
But part of the research is obviously a big issue in medical science, which Bob would know a lot more than me, but there's a huge genome project at St. Jude. And actually the campus, which is a beautiful place, has not only the hospital, but most of it, I think, is consumed by the research facilities, these huge buildings where all of the research is done, including on the genetic ties to various kinds of cancers and so on.
So, Joe, as long as we've got your attention
Okay.
here, let's talk a little bit about fundraising. I know you're the co-chair of this event, and I looked it up on the web beforehand, and it does look pretty interesting. Lots of restaurants are going to be there, and it's a great way for people to come and contribute to this amazing cause.
Right. To start with the fundraising, I think the latest figure is that in order to operate the hospital, because very little of their money comes from insurance, because they support any patient who needs the care, but I think it's in the nature of about $2 million per day that St. Jude needs to operate all of the facilities, including both the hospital and the research. So fundraising is critical. And this fundraiser that I'm honored to be the co-chair of is really the largest annual Chicago fundraiser of its type for St. Jude. in Chicago. And I'd like to think that we started the whole concept of kind of having a mini Taste of Chicago event. It's in the Chicago Hilton Hotel, and in the Grand Ballroom. We usually have 800, and this year we'll expect maybe 900 people to attend. And the entire perimeter of the Grand Ballroom has about 25 different restaurants, all of whom are serving a small portion of one of their signature dishes. And so it's a great dining experience for foodies who really want to taste some of the best cuisine in Chicago.
The date of the event is?
This is the event.
No, the date.
Oh, I'm sorry, I should say that.
Happening?
It's May 3rd on a Tuesday night. The event starts at about 5:30 with cocktails, and then everybody goes into the Grand Ballroom. And there's a relatively short program where we talk about St. Jude and St. Jude's mission. And there's always a patient family that's invited to come to talk about their particular experience with St. Jude. And then, of course, the great dining. It really is, I mean, I might have a little bias here, but it really is a great event. As far as these events go, it's really a wonderful event, not only because of the food, but it's so inspirational. I mean, by the time the patient family comes up and explains what happened to them, and childhood cancer, I think it's really hard to find a nobler charitable cause than this, and that's why I'm so committed to St. Jude. If you're going to pick among all of the charities in the world, I mean, I think this would be at the top of most people's list. Any person who's stricken with cancer, it's a very, very difficult, heart-wrenching thing. But to think that your child, or any other child who hasn't really had a chance at all to live their life, and Danny Thomas's credo was that no child should have to die in the dawn of life. So it's one of the greatest charities in the world.
So how did you get drawn to this? How did it?
I'm glad you asked me that question, because I was drawn into this by a family in Oak Park and River Forest, the Shaker family. And I became very, very good friends right after my law school experience with Anthony Shaker, one of the Shakers. And they became very good friends, and we had a professional relationship, but I'm like an adopted part of their family. And their father, Joe Shaker, actually was one of the founding members of the hospital with Danny Thomas back in 1962 and helped get the hospital off the ground. So I'm very, very proud of that.
So it's sort of a family connection for you. That's
it's almost like a family connection. And actually, Bob has the same family connection because he's married to Kathy Shaker Breit. So
Bob, is that how you got pulled in as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how long have you guys been, Bob, how long have you been associated with St. Jude?
I've been a member of the Board of Governors for 20 years.
Okay, so you've seen a lot of changes in 20 years.
I've seen a lot of changes, and it's taken almost that long to understand the complexities of St. Jude. It's an amazing organization, and yes, but I've been involved for a long time.
And I saw, again, in a little bit of web surfing ahead of time, that the success rate, if we go back to, it was in 1962 when it was founded, that only about 20% of childhood cancers were curable, and now that's up to close to 80%. Is that an accurate description of what's happening in this?
That is, and St. Jude is determined to move that number to 90%. When the doors opened at St. Jude in 1962, the cure rate for the most common type of childhood cancer, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, ALL, was 4%. In 1971, St. Jude published its results, having moved the cure rate up to 50%. That was unheard of. It actually, what St. Jude did is they put the word cure in the discussion of acute lymphoblastic leukemia.
Which no one had thought about before. It was just
No.
how to contain it.
No, there were a lot of naysayers to even opening up this hospital because pediatric cancer was not something that was curable. It just
wasn't.
It wasn't.
That was the
Now the
experience.
cure rate at St. Jude for all comers with ALL is 94%.
So from 4% to 94%.
This is the best example of the old quote about how there is no problem that can withstand the thinking of great minds. I mean, this is really an example of an institution which found a way to solve one of the most critical problems that you could ever imagine, a child with cancer. So it's a great, great story, and its mission is probably the noblest one I could think of in terms of a charitable cause.
Well, actually, it reminds me, this is a little bit far afield, but I'll tell you anyway, that a book I read years ago by an economist named Julian Simon, who was arguing at that time that we would never run out of natural resources, because the real resource, in fact, and the name of the book, I think, was The Ultimate Resource, is human intelligence. Mm-hmm. And it's the same idea, that if we start to run out of something, humans will figure out a way to get around it. There'll be a substitute. They'll find some way to keep going, and that whatever that commodity is will become unimportant. And here it's very much the same.
It's clearly the best way to deploy the human mind, I would think, in something that results in this kind of a change, dramatic change in the lives of people.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting you mentioned that childhood cancer was considered incurable. And I would guess, not knowing a whole lot about it, that because cancer tends to be, the earlier you get it, the tougher it is to keep it at bay. So at least that's my common person's knowledge of it. Mm-hmm. So is that part of what was going on? I thought, well, if you get cancer at the age of 4 or 5, well, gee, you know, what's the odds you're going to live to be 40 or 50?
Well, the odds were very low. And what St. Jude invented, we take for granted now. When folks get cancer now, they get different kinds of chemotherapy, they might get radiation therapy, they might get surgery. That's not how it was done before. And the attack on ALL was an all-out assault with multiple tools, different kinds of chemotherapy and radiation. We take it for granted now. St. Jude invented that idea, and we use it now in every kind of attack on cancer.
Again, another story that I know. A colleague of mine who's a few years older than I am, when he was 14, he had testicular cancer. And it was 14, so that was 50 years ago for him. So 50 years ago, things were much more primitive than they are today. And he was essentially given up for dead by his doctors and his medical team, and they were recommending palliative care to just ease him out. And there was one doctor who said, no, I'm going to make sure that this kid pulls through. And he went through everything that you're describing. He everything that was possible, everything that was new, everything that he thought had a chance. And today he's 64 and has been in remission for 50 years. So these are the kinds of things that are achievable with research.
Yes.
So let's go back to fundraising and talk about how fundraising supports this kind of effort.
Well, as you probably know, I mean, St. Jude does all kinds of fundraisers across the United States, and Marlo Thomas is the leader in that regard. But they have a thanks and giving program. They are supported by radio station events and so on and so forth. This particular event is a sit-down dinner, although like a buffet. Mm-hmm. But it has, you know, the fine dining, the inspirational story, and I was about to say before that there's very few people in this room, even if they've been to one of these events before, that can keep a dry eye when you hear the stories of the miraculous things that St. Jude did for some of the families that speak at the event. But then there's a silent auction with a lot of great gifts, including sports gifts and seats and Masters tickets and stuff like that, along with a live auction as well for some of the higher end things that are on our that are involved in the auction.
So what's a typical
it's a great
dollar
event
amount for this event to raise?
We have gone from, and I checked this, it started in about 1995, and I think we raised a total of gross about $70,000. Mm-hmm. Last year, we had over $800,000 that we raised. This year, we hope to hit the $900,000 level. So that kind of fundraising is necessary because, as I said,
it's $2 million a day.
St. Jude doesn't ask any of the patients to provide any of their own resources. And to the limited extent insurance is available, they take it. But I think it's like 80% of the patients don't have any insurance that cover the kind of cutting edge
Sure, insurance only
care.
Covers the standard protocols.
Right,
and
they wouldn't. Most of them wouldn't cover the kind of cutting edge care that they're getting at St. Jude. So it costs $2 million a day to operate the hospital, and so we're in our own small way, but in one of the biggest events in Chicago in this regard, helping the hospital continue to operate at the highest level.
Well, let me come back to the research question. I'm thinking about how to phrase this question properly. How is it that St. Jude is able to do this kind of research that seems to come uniquely out of them? What is it about the research facility or the people they hire, the researchers they bring in? I mean, what's the magic formula that allows them to do this?
There's no one answer to that. There's a culture that is unique, I believe, in any compared to any other academic medical institution in the country. Most everyone is focused on the mission. I've never been involved with any institution, and I've been involved with many, that lives and breathes the mission of the institution.
And the mission mean, if you can sum up the mission in a sentence.
The mission is to find cures for cancer and other catastrophic diseases through research and treatment. And Joe effectively said, when no child should die in the dawn of life, that's not specifically in the mission, but people look to the mission, and it controls the culture, and the dollars that we raise, we spend wisely, and the infrastructure that's at St. Jude is unlike anywhere.
How so?
We're the only institution in the world that has a proton density treatment center dedicated only to children.
And that's a proton beam that's used to attack tumors, is that?
Yes, yes, that's just one example. There are other core facilities throughout the institution that any researcher can share, and it's part of the collaboration that ultimately leads to successes.
Yeah, but one of the things about that occurs to me is when you visit the complex there, it's been voted a number of times as one of the best places to work in America. And the attitude of the people that are there is just something that infects you. When you go into the hospital, the other thing about the hospital is it doesn't look like a hospital, okay? It's a children's hospital, but it has murals, it has game rooms, it has all of this stuff for the kids to participate in so that they don't really feel like they're in a hospital. And
that
they
seems
have
very important. That
oh,
the kids
for
would
the
have
children,
this different atmosphere.
they're in a friendly environment. They're in an environment where they're thinking positive, or getting mind off of all of the other stuff that they're thinking about in terms of their health. So, and from my own experience, Bob would know better than me, I mean, most of the young, really motivated, really bright people who come to the hospital come there because they are this is the place that a lot of these people, after they get out of medical school or out of nursing school, they are just clamoring to work for St. Jude.
So this is a plum job. If you can land a job there, that's top of the heap.
And their attitude is just, they really want to make a difference in the world. I mean, they were doing it for this reason as opposed to economic reasons or something. So the whole staff there has this camaraderie and this collegiality and attitude that really sparks great invention. I mean, it's a wonderful place. And then the people that they have working there are just unbelievable. I mean, there was at least one Nobel Prize winner in medicine, Dr. Doherty, I think it was. Peter Doherty, who was one of their chief physicians during that period about 10, 15 years ago. So the quality of the people that are there, they come there for a reason. They are the really dedicated doctors and scientists who really believe that they can make a difference in the world.
So I'm glad you bring that up, because I think culture is such an important part of any organization. And what I'm hearing from you is that the culture at St. Jude's is very carefully maintained. Bob, you talked about the mission and keeping everybody focused on the mission. My own experience, my wife had cancer for many years, ultimately died of it, but we went to many hospitals in the Chicago area and had very different cultural experiences with different hospitals. And there are some, whom I won't mention on the air, where we felt that they were much more interested in whether or not they could write a really cutting-edge paper about this than they were about my wife as a person needing help. So one of the things I think about, I don't suspect this is true at St. Jude's, But this particular hospital was famous for its research. And so when I think of research-oriented organizations, I wonder sometimes whether the human element gets lost. Is that ever an issue at St. Jude?
It's always an issue. You're constantly battling those different forces. But the fact of the matter is, you need the scientists, and scientists are not necessarily on the average as empathetic or as warm as others. And there's every 3 or 4 years, every hospital in the country is visited by the Joint Commission. It's a regulatory agency.
Sounds scary.
It is scary. Every hospital really panics to prepare for this. And you would think that a place like a pediatric cancer hospital would be dire. Well, at our last session with the Joint Commission, they were there for 3 days, and at the end, the leader, giving her final remarks, said, "They say that Disneyland is the happiest place on earth. It's not. It's St. Jude."
Wow.
Yeah,
What
that was a
comment.
wow moment.
Yeah, it sure is.
Yeah.
So is this the kind of story that you're going to tell at the fundraiser, these wow moments?
There's usually a video that kind of gives a little bit of a glimpse of the hospital and then the patient family, but it really is a wonderful event. So for all of the people viewing, what I'd suggest is that they go to St. Jude's website and go on St. Jude/4 stars event. And by the way, it's called 4 stars because the city of Chicago's flag has 4 stars.
And you told me
And that's-
beforehand, before the show,
Yeah,
what those
you're
4
going to ask
stars
me
are.
again now. It's like
Yeah, so I didn't know that. So tell us what the 4 stars stand for.
Okay, Fort Dearborn, the Great Chicago Fire, and then the 2 World's Fairs in 1893 and 1933. Those are the 4 stars.
And I was born and raised here. I would have thought I would have known that, but I didn't.
Should I mention the fact that they're clamoring for a 5th? Because if the Cubs win the World Series this year, but I would think that's very unfair to the White Sox.
Who, in fact, just recently won a World Series, not too many years ago.
05. I just
Yes.
happen to remember that.
Yeah, it's within the last decade, and the Cubs, we talk in terms of centuries, not decades. So what, Bob, coming back to you, what do you want to see St. Jude's be able to do in the future that they might not be able to do, but with help they could?
Well, St. Jude needs to drive up cure rates. Joe alluded to the amazing pediatric genomic work that's done at St. Jude. And I think you know what genes do. They create proteins. We talked about this earlier. But with the Pediatric Genome Project, which is a one-of-a-kind project, St. Jude has been able to determine that, for example, acute lymphoblastic leukemia is not one disease or 2 diseases. It's like a dozen different kinds of diseases. And that 6% of kids that don't do well have a particular genomic picture. And
On that note,
Yes.
we're going to have to leave our audience hanging. They'll have to
Okay.
come to the fundraiser to find out more.
yeah,
I
that
hope
would be
they do.
great.
Yeah.
I hope they do.
Bob, Joe, I really appreciate you both being here. I
Thank you,
myself have
Kevin.
learned a lot, and I'll see you at the fundraiser.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you for joining us once again on Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. You can find us every Saturday night at 8 on Comcast Channel 19 and see us on the web at publicperspective.tv. So till next time, thank you and good night.